In the last video, we talked about the types of vaccines, but have you ever thought about how they came to exist? Well, here is the history of vaccines. By the Middle Ages, the Chinese had developed a method that would act similarly to vaccines by providing immunity in the same way. Scabs from a person with a mild case of smallpox were collected. They were dried up and ground finely into a powder. Then they were placed firmly inside cotton and wrapped up. Then they were stuffed into a pipe, and this pipe was puffed into an uninfected person's nose. This process was called insufflation and was the first documented method of inoculation. Vaccination dates back to 1796 when Edward Jenner, an English doctor, noticed that milkmaids who had gotten cowpox were safe from the smallpox virus. Edward Jenner had known of the variolation process and hypothesized that exposure to cowpox could protect against smallpox. For evidence to his hypothesis, he conducted an experiment by injecting the substance from a cowpox sore from a milkmaid and injected it into 9-year-old James Phipps. A few months later, he exposed the boy to the virus multiple times, and he noticed that the boy never caught the virus. More experiments followed, and in 1801, Edward Jenner published his writing on the origin of vaccine inoculation, where he showed his discoveries and expressed his hope to annihilate smallpox. Vaccination later became widely accepted during the 1800s and replaced the old method of variolation. The virus used to make the vaccine was also changed from the cowpox virus to the vaccinia virus. Following the smallpox vaccine, Louis Pasteur's experiments led to the development of the live attenuated vaccines. He also developed the first cholera and rabies vaccines in the 1880s. The first toxoid vaccines were invented by Alexander Glennie and Barbara Hopkins during the early 1900s. These included the tetanus and diphtheria vaccine. The first inactivated vaccine was the inactivated influenza vaccine invented by Thomas Francis and Jonas Salk in the 1940s. The first subunit vaccine would be the hepatitis B vaccine that was developed by Morris Hillman in 1986. Research of the mRNA vaccine had been there from the 1960s. However, an actual mRNA vaccine wasn't developed until the recent COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020. Trying to reach herd immunity was very important to stop the different pandemics and outbreaks. This is why the recommended vaccines changed quite regularly. In the late 1940s, smallpox, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis were on the list. Following this, in the late 1950s saw the addition of the polio, IPV. Measles, mumps, and rubella were later added on in the 1960s. Between 1985 and 1994, the polio, OPV, and HIV were added. 1994 to 1995 saw the addition of the hepatitis B vaccine. Varicella and hepatitis A were added in the 2000s. Pneumococcal and influenza were added on in 2005, as well as rotavirus in 2010. And as mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 vaccine, which came out in 2020, is on the list.